Hey everyone, we got Kenzie Dodds! So really quickly, I'm just going to ask that if you end up liking the conversation, please consider liking and subscribing as it really helps the channel out. And thanks so much. It really means a lot to us. And here's Kent. Hey everyone, ZDS 074? I'm so distracted by Kent, I forgot the number. Kent, so excited to have you. How are you doing, sir?
Doing great. Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be here.
Oh, honor is absolutely 100% all mine. I've been, so for February, I have this thing in my head that I'm going to be focused on React. And obviously, the first thing I went for was your Epic React course. So
Cool.
bought it back in December, actually, and I got through the first modules. The first modules I went through really, really quickly. I think the intro to React and then the intro to hooks. I think I did those both in one night, actually. And then
Wow,
I
that's
got into
impressive.
oh, thanks. Well, I feel like I almost did myself a disservice going through them so fast.
Yeah,
I
you probably did.
realized, yeah, I realized so I would watch, I would get the lesson, I'd do them, and I'd watch you do it. I'd had you on 2 times speed, so I was just trucking through these, okay, let's get this, and then I was ignoring the links and stuff like that, and then I got to advanced hooks, and stuff started being really interesting to me, and I was like, wait, he's got all these awesome resources spread throughout here. I really should be listening to these. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's,
Yeah,
it's been less slower. Oh, sorry,
Epic
go ahead.
React it's way more than just a bunch of videos.
Yeah,
If you a lot of people enter the whole thing like it's a Udemy course or something, or an Egghead course or something, and they just kind of go through it.
yeah.
A lot of people think of it as like a course, and it just happens to have some exercises.
Hmm.
But it's way more than that. And as you mentioned, all of the resources and everything, that's very intentional, and we want you to go through those. So yeah, it's very unusual for somebody to get through even one workshop in a single night, because there's just a lot more that you're missing out on if you're going through it that fast.
Yeah, for sure. No, I almost feel like I should go back and redo those courses now.
You wouldn't be the
In
only one.
retrospect.
There are plenty of people who do that. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, speaking of which, one of the most interesting things I've thought about your course was, so I haven't checked into this myself, but I had heard you have these groups of people in your community that will get together and set themselves a course, almost like a course at a college, and
Hmm.
go through it at the same pace, which I thought was awesome. Can you tell us a
Yeah.
little more about that?
Yeah. So, like I said, a lot of people think of Epic React as an Egghead course or something like that, and
Yeah.
it's not that at all. It's a lot better to compare it to a course in a university or something,
Yeah.
because it's not the sort of thing that you can just plow through in a week or two or anything like that. It's really something that you should be interleaving into the other activities that you do when you're learning React, like actually building something.
Hmm.
And because it is that way, it's a lot more difficult to stay motivated and accountable if you're just going through it all by yourself in your basement or whatever.
Yeah.
And so when I was preparing this material, all the recorded material that I make, I give as a live workshop first. And so I've given this material many, many times to thousands of developers in a live setting. So I get a really good idea of what works, what doesn't, what needs to be improved, whatever.
Yeah.
And so before I recorded all of this stuff, I decided to do just one last time. Let's just see, one last run through of everything. And when I did that, I sold it as a masterclass. So you could buy individual tickets to individual workshops, or you could buy one ticket to all of them. And this happened over the course of 2 or 3 months. We would hold these. And most people just bought a ticket for all of them. And what was interesting when I did that is I saw that they developed a relationship with each other, and they were helping each other out a lot more. And the experience was better for everybody. And so that's where the idea of the KCD learning clubs came from. Was I wanted to, one of the things that's really important to me about Epic React is that I want to allow you to have the live workshop type experience where it's we've got exercises and we've got other people that we're working through and everything. But and you have an instructor you can ask questions of and stuff. But I want this to scale beyond that. I don't scale very well. I'm just a single person. And so when we move it over to recording, we lose a lot of that stuff. And so we make up for it by having the KCD learning clubs. We have the Discord. I have office hours every week, so that people can have those same experiences. And then because I'm able to scale so well, I'm able to bring the price way down. So
Yeah.
the cost of Epic React, it's expensive if you're comparing it to something like on Udemy or something,
Yeah.
but it's nothing like that. It is very, very cheap relative to the sort of thing that you would compare it to, like a university course.
Yeah.
And actually the whole cost of Epic React is equal to the cost of a single live workshop. And so you get a lot more because I'm able to scale, but then you don't lose anything because we have the learning clubs and the Discord and office hours and stuff like that.
Yeah, very cool. No, I loved like researching up on you once I knew you'd be on the show, seeing your dedication to like doing this stuff in person first. Because you can see, I think in person you get that connection so much better. Like even right now, you and me being like doing this over the internet, this is a different conversation I think than what we'd have if we were face to face. So you know, there's something there, and but taking that and then doing the best you can to like make that remote, but keeping as much as you can from that in-person experience through stuff like the Kenzie Dodds, the groups going on there and stuff going on.
Yeah, and you know, it's not just let's try to hang on to all the good things of live workshops, but also let's get rid of the bad things of live workshops too. Like in a live workshop, you all have to be there and ready and like healthy and everything all at the exact same time. And so that may involve flying in and staying in a bed that was too soft, or, you know, like whatever. You're not in your normal situation. You're not comfortable. And so it's not always a terrific learning environment. Maybe there's construction down the street or something like that. So we're able to hang on to all the good things of a live workshop and get rid of all the bad things of a live workshop too, which I think is a really cool thing. So personally, I feel like the self-paced workshop structure that Epic React has is better than a live workshop. And so when people come in to me and say, hey, we'd like you to deliver a workshop for us, I'd say, hey, that's great. And I'm happy to do that. But did you know that you could get even more and way better experience by just getting a license to this thing?
Yeah. Well, that's an awesome way, I think, of systematizing that for yourself too, right? Like you said, you only have a certain amount of resources, and to be able to say, here's a packaged product instead of you got to ship me Kenzie Dodds over to this location to do that. That's
exactly
cool. I've been loving the dunking on Udemy, by the way. Like I've been having similar thoughts recently as well. I actually have a good friend, Jeff Delaney, who he runs the YouTube channel Fireship.io. I don't know if you've seen that or not.
Yeah, actually, I just literally watched one from him about FaunaDB. I was very impressed.
He is so good at what he does, but the magic, I think, of what he does is he takes these things that could be a whole Udemy course, compresses it down to like 5 to 10 minutes, and you get like there is some value to that, sitting back and just watching someone else do something, but it should be something you do for like 10 hours. If you could compress it down to those 10 minutes, it's like your brain's in this fishbowl and you're giving it some interesting food for it to like work into its neural net. I think that there's a lot of value in that, but
I agree with you. I think that the value is let me get an idea of what this can do, what is possible, so that I know, like, I can quickly evaluate whether this is something I need to commit multiple hours into figuring out and working into my product. There's definitely a place for that. This is where like talks are really useful, you know, like at conferences and stuff. And I want to be clear, I'm not dunking on anybody who creates or consumes on Udemy. They're hardworking people, and they're just trying to learn, and it's a really cheap place to get things. It's Udemy, the company, that I have a big issue with. I do not like that company at all.
Yeah, I've never been on their site where things aren't on a 90% off sale. So I don't know.
Isn't that just the most shady thing that you can imagine?
With the 90% off sale with the ticking clock is like, the first I was like, oh, that's cool, and then I was like, wait, did that clock reset?
Yeah, it's garbage. It really is, and that's not even the half of it. But I don't want to talk about that.
Sorry, let's not get into that. Let's see something else interesting we can get into. Podcasts. This was something really interesting for me to find out, because I entered my first job in this industry was I got into in 2015, and I was, in a different world at the time, kind of doing more Java stuff. So like you're often doing all your cool stuff, and I was completely unaware of it. But so you were the guy that started Angular Air. You ran your own podcast called JavaScript Air. You have now a podcast called Chats with Kent. I think you just finished your third season in 2020. And you've got this really cool idea that I've been loving, the 3 Minutes with Kent, on your website here. It's like a micro podcast, which I've been loving listening to those, and just it's kind of like the thing from Jeff that I was talking about. It's like it's a perfect thing for a little bit of fish food for your brain. But yeah, really enjoying that.
Yeah. Podcasting has been a lot of fun. There's one other, there's a podcast on Epic React. And actually, so there's
the whole last module here looks like just interviews with experts.
Yeah. So there's the expert interviews there. There's also Testing JavaScript has expert interviews. And then there's a public and free podcast that is just interviews between, I'm going to say Chantastic, but Michael Chan. He's the host and I'm the guest. And so there are like 9 episodes there. So yeah, podcasting has been a part of what the type of content that I produce for a very long time. Yeah. It's a great form of content. It started when I was listening to podcasts in my car, and I would start talking, just like react or respond to what they say or the questions they ask. And I was like, I really want to be a part of this, but like, you can't just call somebody up and be like, hey, can I be a panelist on your show? I guess you can, but I didn't. I was like, I'll just start my own. Yeah. And Angular Air was the first one that I started with Tom Motto. Or Todd. I said Tom, but Todd. And that was a good run. And then when I left, I stopped Angular. I started doing JavaScript. And then the 3 Minutes with Kent came up when I discovered this briefs.fm service where they said, let's do this 3-minute podcast thing. And it's so easy. It takes me 4 minutes to make one of those shows. And so I do it pretty much every day. And it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, well, so you had to stop doing both Angular Air. You handed off to someone. The JavaScript Air, you just kind of cut off because you were thinking about redoing it again. So I think you cited like the costs of doing that as the thing that like made you want to. Well, I guess Angular, you were switching away from Angular.
Yeah. But it takes a lot of effort to get a guest for a live show. Yeah. When it's going to be broadcast, then you don't. Especially if you want to have any semblance of consistency for the audience and everything, you want to have it at the same time every week. And you don't want to skip a week. You don't want to do it like a half hour later or anything. So getting guests lined up for like a very rigid time is just really difficult. And I didn't have like a virtual assistant to hire or anything like that. It was all me. And so I was just like, I can't afford this time. Maybe someday I'll bring it back up again. But yeah, all the podcasts after JavaScript Air were typical recorded and then, posted later because it's just a lot of effort. Now, part of the reason that I did it the way that I did was because it's not a lot of effort to get it recorded and it gives me an excuse to not have to edit the podcast or anything. It's like, sorry, it was live. Like, I can't cut that out. So there was a lot to do on that side of things. But now all the podcasts that I do are either like the 3 Minutes with Kent, where it's just literally on my phone. I do one take, I just shoot it off. It's very fast. Or it's going to be a collaboration with the Egghead folks that I collaborate with, like tons of stuff is with Egghead, like Epic React, Testing JavaScript, Chats with Kent, even KentCDodds.com. All of that is collaboration with Egghead. Yeah. And so they manage all of the editing and everything. I just create content.
The apps are very impressive for these too. I really like it. It's like the optimal app.
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, very cool. Yeah, it's interesting to hear you talk about the struggles of a live one. I actually, before this show was ZDS, it was ZLS for Zach Livestream, and I was like, I don't want to do this live anymore, but I want to keep the branding. So I just like switched that out to a D, make it my last name. But it, like you said, it's a lot easier. There's a lot less pressure. Honestly, the biggest thing driving me was actually I felt like my focus was away from the actual conversation and was instead on like checking. There's like when you drive, you do those like every 10 seconds you're supposed to check the mirrors. That's what I was doing, like with the comments, with how many people were checking, and I'd like lose track of the conversation. It just felt I don't know. I want to focus instead
I
on this.
totally relate. Yep, I know what you're
Yeah.
talking about.
If I ever have the resources, the next thing would be to try to fly out people to actually have conversations in
That would
person.
be
But
interesting. Yeah, that'd be cool.
that's more of a pipe dream. I don't think I'll ever have those resources, but it's nice to dream, right?
Uh,
But yeah, moving on to maybe a next topic. So I heard your conversation on defmode.fm. That seemed like a really fun conversation.
yeah. I've been a guest on a lot of podcasts, and that one in particular, I thought really, I don't know, it felt really real to me. So
Yeah.
I enjoyed that one a lot.
Those guys knew what they were doing, especially what was it, the example with the grandma who like threw you on the
Oh my
ground and
gosh. Yeah.
like,
Yeah. Anybody listening to this, go listen to it. It's just in the first like 10 minutes or something.
yeah.
But, like that was
I'll
so
make sure I
vivid.
link it down in the details too, so you can check it out. It was those guys know what they're doing. Like
Yeah,
it
that was
was
pretty
very
good.
cool. Yeah, I love people who are good at conversation. I feel like I've got to check out defmode.fm. The only thing I've heard from them so far was your conversation, but I'm sure they do other stuff too, judging by their conversation with you. But
Yeah.
one thing I wanted to latch onto was this idea of thin clients versus thick clients. And I think this stemmed from some stuff that Ryan Florence has been saying recently. I think he had a tweet about like the web should be documents, right? And when we try to make it more than that, I don't want to misquote him, but it sounded like he was very much in favor of a thin client, which I was very interested in. I love the idea of like, if I make an app myself, it's thick with like 3 C's, so I don't know. I think you had a 3 minutes with Kent about this recently too.
Yeah, I
but
did.
it sounds like you're siding more with the thin as well. Is that right?
Well, so for me, I side on the best user experience possible, and
Okay.
and I think most people would say that that's what they're trying to accomplish, right? I don't think
Yeah.
anybody wants to just go full on whatever is easiest. They want to do what's best for the user, and maybe sometimes those two things align. Like at a company where you're building an enterprise app, and like the only time anybody ever uses your thing is when they're on a desktop computer with a really fast internet connection, then fine, yeah, throw Create React app at that or whatever, who cares? And at that point, what's best for the user is for you to move fast and not worry so much about like a couple milliseconds on performance, right? Who cares
Yeah.
in that situation? And they're more interested in you moving fast and developing features fast than the browser app being like 500 milliseconds, loading time versus whatever. So,
Yeah.
but for lots of us, we're building like user-facing apps, and in that situation, yeah, they care about features getting built out and bugs, being free of bugs and stuff. But they're also really interested in things being fast and things working on a unreliable internet connection. And this is where Remix, I could talk forever about Remix. I love Remix. And just the ideas that it's promoting. But this is where Remix comes in really handy, where you're able to, I feel like you can move really fast with Remix because of the nested routing that's supported there. And but you also get a lot of control over the performance aspects as well.
Yeah.
And
Latching on to what you mentioned, sorry, latching on to what you mentioned about the routing, it's done by the guys who did React Router, right?
Yeah.
So
like, they get it.
they know it. They built it.
Yeah,
Sorry for interrupting you, though. Where were you going?
Yeah, so like, I think primarily when we're talking about thin versus thick clients, in general, that conversation is how much JavaScript do you send to the browser? Well, right now, even with Remix or any React server rendered thing, unless you don't rehydrate on the client, in which case you don't really have much interactivity, except for like maybe extra JavaScript you just add in. And so most people don't do that. Most people are rehydrating. So you're going to have a thick client if you're doing server-side React. React server components may change this a little bit in the future, but for right now, that's where we're at. So what Ryan is mostly talking about is, and I'm on this side as well, the browser already has great affordances for when you are navigating. So like you click on a link and you'll see the spinner show up, and like an indicator at the bottom of the screen will show something that's saying waiting for this site or whatever. So there's a loading state there, and and you don't actually transition until all of the data is ready to be shown. And so that's actually not a bad experience. People are really used to that, and it's a pretty solid experience. You don't transition until it's ready, and so you get to even potentially make use of what you were, like the information you were on before. You can maybe change your mind and click on a different link, and it'll just be like, all right, whatever, we'll just go to this new thing instead. So like there's a lot of benefit there. And when you go to client-side routing and just 100% client-side, now the default that everybody goes to is there's no loading spinners. There's you transition immediately, and that's the default. Then you have to add on top of that. You have to add the good user experience, and often people don't do it because maybe it's not really slow for you as the developer when you're working on your machine that's like very fast and not a mobile device. And then designers don't often think about loading states, and so they don't give that to you. And so you have to kind of, when you realize, oh yeah, I need a loading state, then you just make something up, and you end up with 30 spinners on the page or whatever. So I think that's kind of where Ryan's coming from. That's where I'm coming from. It's if you're not going to take the time to make that transition experience really great, then you'd be better off just going with what's default and built into the browser. And that's actually going to be the default for Remix as well. You have to opt into doing client-side routing. Otherwise, by default, it just does full document. And that doesn't mean it's going to be slow. A lot of people are like, oh no, now you have to hit the server. Like every user is going to just be running your server.
Yeah. That's not that bad. Like, especially if these are just like little HTML files. Like,
well, and even then, like if it's just an HTML file, like let's say it's a blog, and so there's no user-specific information. The cool thing about Remix, and Next has this too. Like this is 20-year-old technology. You can set cache headers, and so like you put it up on a CDN. You say, hey CDN, I want you to cache this for basically forever. And so then it's on the CDN. It's basically like having a static file on the CDN. That was generated at runtime. And then the CDN just sends it, and it can have it cache it in your browser for a minute or two, so you can navigate around really fast. And then if that expires, then you go back to the CDN. The CDN's like, oh, the server told me to cache this forever, so I'll send my version of it. And then you deploy a new version of your app. You say, hey CDN, never mind. I want you to go get the new stuff, and then it will. And so like it is so much more flexible. You have so much more control on the user's experience, and it ends up being really fast for the user. And on the only time that you would have it be doing client-side rendering is if you really want to think about that transition experience. In which case, that'd be better for the user anyway.
Right. So one thing I've been thinking about recently, I've been thinking about like kicking around doing a blog article about this. Like as software developers, we're primarily engineers and not like werewolf hunters. By which I mean like looking for a silver bullet, right?
Oh, okay. I was like, wow, werewolf hunter.
Werewolf hunters, we're going with it. But
great,
I feel like a lot of times we default to werewolf hunters a little bit. Like there's a silver bullet out there. We're going to find it, and that's how we're going to do everything, right?
Yeah, yep.
But I think like engineering is more like the understanding of the trade-offs, like listing out all the different options, understanding the trade-offs between them, and then this process that I think humans are actually extremely good at of taking those options and optimizing them, right? So like the thing with the page transition, like. Yes, you'd have to like just come up with your own method of indicating to the user, okay, we're transitioning here, and you have one, at the platform level already in your browser in terms of like what you said, going from one to the other. But the downside is when that transition does happen, it has to be like a full page refresh, right? Like things are literally going away and coming back.
Yes, that is a big downside.
Yeah, so I don't know. I feel like there are ways of optimizing between those two to say.
Well,
go ahead.
It's not quite as big as a downside as you might think. Because if you have things cached properly, then it is going to download a new HTML page, and it's downloading that HTML page. So that's the initial render. And browsers are crazy optimized for that sort of thing. And so that part's going to be fast, and then it's going to see these script tags and be like, oh, Let me go get React. Oh wait, I've got that in my memory cache, so I've already
Yeah.
got that. We'll just reuse that. And so it's typically pretty fast. You'd be
Mhm.
surprised. A place where you could go test this out is on remix.run, because they are doing this, and in fact, most of their pages don't use JavaScript at all, which is
Cool.
interesting.
That's cool. That's really
It's pretty cool.
cool.
Like even their checkout flow,
Mhm.
where you're like filling in your details and stuff. That's all like, regular form, it posts to the server, all of that stuff,
Yeah.
and it's all built with React with Remix.
Yeah.
So you get that really nice developer experience, but then a user, we don't really, there aren't very many users who disable JavaScript. So
Mhm.
it's not like, that's not why this is cool. Why this is cool is because every one of us has experienced the time where you're loading something on your phone on a bad internet connection and everything loads except for the JavaScript. And so then, like, either, like, if it's a full client side application, you will see nothing.
Yeah.
If it's like rehydrated, then you will see stuff, but you can't do anything. And so by having the progressive enhancement approach that Remix offers, you can still interact with stuff. It'll still work even without the JavaScript. And I think
Yeah.
I really like that feature.
Yeah.
And I get all of the development experience that I like out of React, and the things that Remix gives me. I have a lot of control over the caching, and so I can fine tune the performance aspects. And then if I really want to, then I can take over and make it all client rendered and or client routed, and take control of that loading and transition experience as well. And actually,
Yeah.
they have really great hooks for that transition experience too, where most of the time the default is let's transition right away and then load our data. Whereas they give you really great APIs to say, let's show that we're transitioning, but not actually transition until the next page is ready, which
Hmm.
I think is a better default.
Yeah, that's really cool. Yeah, where I was going with my example is just like I finally got a like a profile site up, and like going from one route to another, I'm using these router animations, and I really like that because like the piece that is changing is the some stuff getting like animated in and out versus the rest of the stuff is still there. It
Mhm.
feels like I don't know. It feels like an app in your browser as opposed to like the pages. Like something about the pages. I don't know. It feels lesser.
Yeah, yeah.
I don't know if that's
I
fair.
agree with you, Zach. And in particular, if we're talking about like you've got a focus in a search input or something, and you
Yeah,
type a search. I don't want to do a full page refresh when I hit submit or whatever.
yeah,
I would like it if it works even without JavaScript. If JavaScript had a problem, that it would be nice if that still worked,
yeah,
which Remix would allow. But yeah, like I don't want to lose my focus and get a full page refresh. And I think that that's the sort of thing that Remix allows you to have that choice and that optionality. Whereas
yeah.
most other options either make it impossible to make the choice, or make it really difficult to choose one or the other.
Yeah.
They just kind of decide this is the way we're going to do it, and it's hard to do it the other way.
For sure. Yeah, well, especially like just from where I'm at. So I've kind of flipped a coin when I started getting into web development, like Angular or React. I didn't really know which one was better, and so the coin came up Angular. It's almost like if if you're going to do a thin client, I don't know if Angular is a very good tool. Like I don't know. React might not be the same story. I feel like React's much more lightweight. The library approach, as opposed to the framework approach, makes a lot more sense for sort of document-centered architecture still. But if you're looking for a thin client, I think like maybe even just vanilla JS might be a good solution there, and maybe use React to enhance that where you need to. I don't know. Do you have any thoughts on
Yeah,
that?
so I think React Server Components is going to be kind of a big deal here,
Mm-hmm.
to enhance that. Svelte is also a great option. I haven't used it, I haven't deployed anything with it, but I can say from looking at it that it seems like really well suited for that sort of thing. I wanted to mention one other thing really
Yeah.
quick, because I agree with you that doing a full page refresh just makes it not feel like an app.
Mm-hmm.
But one thing to keep in mind is that when you're doing server rendering, or sorry, when you're doing client-side rendering, 100% no server, every time you hit refresh, you're going to notice the screen goes white, and then you get all of your content,
Yeah.
which is not great. But if you're server rendering, then the screen never goes white. So it is not necessarily less of an app-like feel in that sense. So if you're doing a transition from the Twitter timeline to the settings page, it doesn't do like remove everything and then put everything back in. So like if
Yeah.
nav is the same, then technically those will be different DOM nodes and everything. But as far as the user is concerned, that nav never went away, and so it does. You can still get that app-like feel. But anyway, that was just one thing I wanted to mention. So
Yeah.
I do agree with you. I think that I don't.
Well, could
Yeah,
I
go ahead.
latch on to something you were just because before I transition away from it? Jack was telling me, Jack from Narwhal, he's like our React guy. One of the most interesting about Remix is like with the problem you were describing, one of the hardest things to do is get the scroll position right. And
Yeah,
it sounds like they got that right,
they
which
did.
was what he was super impressed by. So I was
Yeah.
like, yeah, that got me thinking. Okay, to your point, like maybe we could still do this. Like to Ryan's point, for sure, the web is based on being a document based system, right? Like that's where all this stuff comes into play. Like accessibility, even like. I've been thinking a lot about systemizing our apps. So like you have a system for your routing, you have a system for your data, you have a system for these other things. Accessibility is one of those things that you just like can't systemize well. Like that has to be distributed out across your application throughout each component. It has to worry about that accessibility concerns.
Yeah, it's
Um,
almost as it's kind of like syntax. You have to get the syntax right everywhere in your
yeah,
application. You have to get
yeah,
accessibility right.
and every engineer needs to know that and is what that means. And then it's like and you don't have anyone focused on this, and maybe you do, but it's more in the effort of like auditing.
Mm,
And there's some really interesting stuff there around like AI that I think could be super helpful, but it's just not how the web's built right now in terms
mm,
of like if we had some AI that could like read a screen and tell you this is the main information on this page. um, I think that would be like a way of systemizing that accessibility concern, where you didn't have to spread it out through your whole thing. So
mm.
I don't know. Is accessibility something you think a lot in your
Yeah,
work
yeah,
or?
absolutely. I
Okay.
think the way that you could kind of systemize stuff like this is kind of two things. Um,
Yeah.
so first of all, like framework level things, there are things that you can do, like what Remix is doing with the scroll position in particular. It's a good
Yeah.
example of that. Also, like because they're in charge of the routing as well, they can also make sure that focus gets to the right place
Yeah.
as you're making route transitions. The other thing that you can do is in component libraries. So your company has a component library. Hopefully, you're building. So I actually literally just wrote about this week,
Oh,
where it's
cool.
like build versus buy component libraries edition,
Yeah.
where you're deciding whether or not to use an open source library or build your own. And my assertion is like you probably should have a component library, but those things should probably be built on top of lower level ones that are open source and battle tested. So there are really
Mm.
good ones like Reach UI has great modals and accordions. Well, I don't think they actually have an accordion, but like tabs and different things like that that
Hmm.
are like built from an accessibility standpoint and very stylable. They have just the styles that are necessary for accessibility.
Hmm.
What's interesting actually is a lot of people will say that JavaScript was bad for accessibility when actually uh, there are a lot of UI type elements that you cannot make accessible without JavaScript.
Mm.
And so having a solid library that understands that and has been battle tested and is mature is really valuable. Because if you think about it, you look at these component libraries and the thousands of issues that they've gone through to fix all the bugs. You can either build on top of what they've given you, or you can experience all those exact same bugs in your own implementation and pass those on to your users who may or may not complain and may just hate you forever. So
Yeah.
I think about accessibility a lot because I don't feel like your application is done until it's accessible.
Yeah. No, this is something I think about a lot in college. We had like our senior capstone class. We actually had a legally blind man come in and tell us about his experience like trying to traverse the web. And it was awful. Like
Yeah.
he told us about he did a one man I don't know what you call it, a cruise, or he sailed a boat across the Atlantic by himself, I guess with his dog. But like that was really cool to hear about how he was able to overcome his disability to do that. And it's like that didn't scare me. What scares me is trying to get information off the web. And I was like,
Wow.
dang, like what a perspective of that.
Yeah, that's crazy.
But so it was really cool to hear that story. But then we went from that to like our capstone was we had to like find some site that wasn't accessible and like give them some recommendations on how to make it more accessible. And it is this like definitely worthwhile work, but it was like I just remember thinking this, like looking at it and be like, this can't be the best way, because there's no way we can keep up, with the amount of stuff getting put out on the web. Like if it's a manual process of auditing these things or something like that, taking it like one by one, there's got to be a more like systemic approach we could take to fix this. So
Yeah,
I think about that a lot.
yeah, that's an interesting thing to think about.
Yeah. But anyways, sorry. Let's talk about some more stuff. React and Angular. We kind of touched on this a little bit. So you started out with Angular JS, right? And then went. I think in one of your pieces of content you talked about Angular 2 was just taking a while to get out, and that was the reason why you jumped into React in the first place.
Yeah, that had a lot to do with it. So the first framework I worked with in JavaScript was Backbone, and then that was at Domo. So
Okay.
Angular folks would probably know Domo because that's ngconf is, Domo was the Kickstarter on that. But yeah, so I was working at Domo. Then a couple guys came in and were like, "Angular's the new thing," and so all right, let's go do Angular JS, and so we switched. And I was super into it. Started the podcast, all that stuff. I'm a core contributor to Angular JS.
Yeah.
I contributed to the injector, and not the compiler. No, just the injector. And so, but I spent plenty of time in that compiler code. Let me tell
That's
you.
so cool. And you did Angular formally, which is really cool. It's something that's come up on my show many times. A lot of people, B-Man, shout out to B-Man, and shout out to Yuri, both love it for their forms. So
Yeah,
I guess
awesome.
It's probably
Yeah,
a different one now with its Angular, but yeah, that was you. I was like, wow.
Yeah, so that one, I didn't create it, but I took it over because the maintainer no longer was using it.
Yeah.
And yeah, now somebody else took it over from me to make the Angular 2 version, and they're still going with it. It's awesome. So yeah, I was way into it. And then Angular 2 started coming around, and they really botched that, honestly, with announcing like, hey, everything that you spent years learning is now useless because the framework is totally different. And that didn't go well, and they know it didn't go well. They would have done things differently, I'm sure.
Yeah. I remember Googling stuff was such a pain when I got started. I got started right as it was officially launched, and trying to figure out, like, I'd Google Angular and then my problem, and I was like, wait, is this the right Angular?
Yeah. Honestly, I kind of feel like they should have renamed it. But they said no, it's Angular JS and Angular, and that wasn't enough, but that's okay. So yeah, I was giving talks about Angular too. I went to conferences where I was like, hey, this is what's coming, and it's awesome. And then the next week it was different. Like things were changing.
One of the most interesting things was like you were on the road to NGConf, and that's when you gave React a try, right? It's such an interesting story.
Yeah, I was driving up to Salt Lake City for NGConf, the first one, and I was listening to a podcast from Christopher Shadow, I think, and maybe Pete Hunt, talking about this React thing. I was like, oh, that sounds interesting, but I'm going to NGConf. So, but yeah, then later I gave it a try and I was like, oh, this is really interesting. Yeah, it wasn't until much later that I decided to make the switch. But yeah, I was just feeling like Angular 2 is taking a really long time, and they kept on, like, their initial announcement of it was like, wow, all of these things I don't like about Angular 1, they're going to get rid of. And then over time, they kept on adding those things back in. And I was like, well, I mean, it's not even going to be different enough for me to really like. React seems really awesome. Like if React didn't exist, I probably would have stuck with Angular too. I've been like, well, it's better than Angular 1.
Yeah.
But yeah, React was even better. And so I'm like, well, if I'm basically going to have to learn a new framework anyway, I may as well learn React because I feel like it's even better. And so that's what motivated the change. I eventually actually changed my job because I wanted to switch to React, and I couldn't responsibly recommend to my job that we rewrite to React. It just like wouldn't be responsible. So I said, well, I can't be here anymore because I don't want to do Angular JS, and I don't want to upgrade to Angular 2. So we're just going to go with React, and that has played out really well for me. I'm really happy with React. I wrote a blog post on epicreact.dev /articles titled "Why I Love React." And it explains some of the things that I just really, I don't like trash Angular or anything like that. I don't think that's productive. I just talk about what I think is so special about React, what makes React so special, and why I really love it.
Yeah, very cool. I'll make sure I put that down in the description as well. But yeah, like one thing about Angular, a couple of things they got right was like it felt like they almost had a crystal ball in terms of knowing what was going to be big. Like TypeScript being a thing when they first launched, that was a very controversial move for them.
Yeah, almost, it was. I remember
almost
that.
Irresponsible. And now everyone's doing TypeScript, right? And
yeah, that was a big bet, and it won. Yeah, they did great.
And RxJS too. That's actually, I love RxJS. Very interested in it. As I'm getting more into React stuff, I almost feel like it doesn't have much of a use case actually in the React framework.
So. Yeah. So Angular went for RxJS for reactivity. React is not reactive, despite the name. But the hooks and stuff make up for that. Like they just do it differently. They took a different approach, and so that's why you won't see many people using RxJS with React because it's just not really needed.
Yeah, that's fair. Well, I wouldn't say React isn't reactive. It's definitely reactive, right? It's just like it's using. I mean, it's kind of using the call stack to get that reactivity if you break it down. Unless I don't know if that's
well, I actually have very limited experience with RxJS. I've tried it 2 or 3 times, and every time I just failed abysmally. So I was like, I guess this just isn't my thing.
I got you.
If I really stuck with Angular 2, then I'm sure I would have dove really deep into it, of course.
Yeah.
But given that I just have very limited, I'm not going to say I have limited use cases. I'm sure that you can fit, everything's a stream. Like you can fit everything into whatever, everything's a hammer and everything's a nail. But like,
I think those are very dangerous statements though. Whenever you get into everything's an X, like I heard that about Flutter, everything's a component, I think was something they said. I was like, oh, everything?
Well, yeah.
Is love a component?
In React, everything used to be a component. Like, I remember seeing the router for, when I was just getting started, I saw the router and I was like, but what does it render? Like you're not going to have a div. I was used to using Angular directives as my components before they introduced Angular.component. And
right.
And so I'd see that and I'd be like, well, what is a router going to render? And so it was very confusing to me. But in React for a long time, everything was a component. Now everything's a component or a hook. But and a hook is just like a small piece of what a component is. It's I agree with you. Those statements of everything's a X are sound very dogmatic.
Yeah, I'm very hesitant to make absolute statements like that.
Yeah,
or at least to make them and hold on to them. But yeah, like this leads into like the idea of systemizing again. I feel like coming from an Angular world, it's like. If you're building a rocket, let's go with like the epic React metaphor, right? If you're building a rocket, Angular kind of gives you, I feel like, this interesting modular thing where you have like this blueprint for a rocket that's set up and it's like, here's the pieces you need, customize those how you want. And then, your rocket's going to be ready. And part about, a lot of me really likes that. React feels like you can... here's a bunch of pieces. It's on you to kind of know how to build the rocket, know which pieces are best for where. And like the everything's a component idea kind of plays into that, right? Like everything's a Lego block. And you can build a lot of cool stuff with just Lego blocks. But if you wanted to build a rocket, sometimes it's better to have specific modules for that. So I don't know.
Hmm.
I'm still playing with around with that idea, but
Yeah,
I'm curious if
like
you.
the different models, I
Yeah,
thought about this a great deal, and the different models
yeah,
have different trade-offs.
sure.
So a weakness of the Angular model where we build everything in is what if what they built in isn't quite right for you? And we'll take this approach with both. So
Yeah,
on the Angular side, if it's not quite right, then you're going to try and find some workaround. You'll do something. Maybe potentially you'll like try to contribute back. They'll say, that's kind of a 1% case, so we're just not going to accept that. And so now you have to do this workaround or whatever. And
change your node modules.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. So that's what you do on the Angular side. On the
Mhm.
React side, if for one thing, you're not the piece that may not be the right fit is not going to be the core of React. Like that will be
Yeah,
the right fit for everything. That
yeah,
literally, there's nothing that you would do in a web UI that React can't do well for you.
hmm
With the exception of like really high performance something, you do sometimes in those situations have to work around it, but Angular would be the same thing.
yeah,
So, yeah, so for most cases, it's not going to be about React. It's going to be about one of the surrounding libraries. And so you run into a problem with a library that isn't quite doing the right thing. And so in that situation, you say, you maybe contribute to the library and say, hey, like here's the thing, and if they say, yeah, that's kind of a 1% case, well, you just fork that library and you can implement it yourself. And because it's what's interesting about that is, let's say that it's not a 1% case. Let's say that they think that it is, but it turns out that a lot of people have the same problem. They've all just been working around it.
yeah,
And if you fork it and you build your own, now everybody else can start innovating around your idea. And
hmm
that's what I think why there's a lot of innovation happening on the React side,
yeah,
because there's the flexibility to do it. Whereas
yeah,
on like Vue or Angular, where lots of things are kind of baked in, it's less likely for you to say, oh, you know what, I'm going to implement my own animation library, my own router or something,
yeah.
because it's not if it's not the blessed solution, then it's
Yes.
unlikely that you're going to get any traction or make it work. Now, I'm not saying there's
Yeah.
no innovation there. There's absolutely innovation, even within the team and outside of the team. But that I see that manifested in the communities where there's just so much stuff going on the React side, and not quite as much going on the Angular or like the framework. Everything's built inside.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's interesting to hear you say that. I always thought it was so interesting. Like, there's a right way of doing stuff in Angular, or there's maybe not right,
The
an
Angular
Angular
way.
way.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's almost like religious, right? Like if someone steps out, it's like blasphemy.
Yeah.
We must shun them.
Yeah,
But
well, there's definitely the React way to do things too,
yeah,
but there's more room for experimentation and
Mhm.
yeah, just trying out different things. Like
Yeah,
hooks were inspired by a component that Ryan made called the React component, where it was a component that you would render, and then it had props for all of the different lifecycle events and stuff,
yeah.
and props for state and everything. So you could actually build your entire application out of just this one component, because you can manage all of your state and side effects and everything with it. It was very cool, and it
Yeah.
inspired hooks quite a bit.
That's awesome. No, I really like hooks. As soon as I saw that, I was like, oh, I see what this is doing. That's what it like the hit the brakes. I was like, kind of slow down and like really understand what's going here, because well, it feels like such a good thing for composability. Like
Yes,
I
yes, it
think
is. That's a huge part of why hooks became a thing.
yeah. Yeah, I feel like for each component you can almost like define. Well, I don't know. But tell me if I'm doing something wrong here, Ken, because I'm very new to React. But it
Mm,
feels like I can build a hook for myself per component that just by bringing some other hooks in, like the standard ones, the use state, the use effect, those kinds of things, and say here's my component hook. All my stateful stuff is essentially here, and then down here I'll just destructure out of that hook any kind of thing I need to render my DOM via TSX, and anything that any callback I'll need to call. I also just structure that out from my hook, and then put that where it needs to go inside of a handler. Is that fair? I mean, that
yeah,
seems like
yeah.
a very
You
straightforward
know
way.
what? one of the things that in that blog post where I say why I love React so much,
Yeah.
what I say is I love React so much because it's simple.
Mm.
Now that's a different word from easy. If you aren't familiar with the difference between simple and easy,
Yeah.
then watch Rich Hickey's talk, Simplicity Matters, or I think he has another one that's
Simple made easy.
Simple
Yeah.
Made Easy. Yeah, yeah.
I talk about these talks all the time. They're criminally underwatched. They're
Yes.
so good. The thing that gets me is the image of the braid. Like
Yes.
that
Yep.
he has this image of a braid as like it's just step-by-step instructions, I think, on how to do a French braid. But you can see at the beginning it's just like these very straight lines, these very straight threads. And then but as we make our applications, we like go through the process of purposely twisting these threads. And that's
Yep.
like I was like, yes, that's exactly what I do all the time.
Exactly. And how do you swap one of those threads once it's been
Yeah.
complected like that? Like it's very, very difficult. You have to unravel them to swap it out. And that's the difference between simple and easy. And so I wouldn't say React is easy. It's not.
Yeah.
For lots of people. Easy is a relative term anyway. But it is simple. There are just a handful of concepts you need to understand. And once you understand those, then it's much easier. Like it becomes easy for you.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's my main thing that I love about React is that it's simple.
Yeah, simple to complex does not move. But
Yeah.
you, as humans, we can move pretty easily between easy and hard,
Yes.
just from like spending the time to learn it.
Yes,
So,
and easy does not a simple application make, right?
Yeah.
So like a maintainable application, it can really only be made by simple architecture and simple tools. If you have complex tools and complex implementation, then your application will be difficult to maintain. And so it's nice to start with a framework that is simple, so that you can build simple things on top of that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think just the biggest thing from that talk that I got out of it was like optimize. Like obviously the simple and easy solution is best, but if you have to choose between something that is simple and hard versus easy and complex, always go for simple and hard.
Yeah.
Right. So yeah. Anyways, it's so cool that you know this talk. Everyone else I've talked to, they're like, oh, I don't know.
Yeah, this is definitely one of those things that I think most people, if you've never heard of this talk, you really, really should. That's the next thing on your list of consumption.
I'll make sure to put the link down there in the description. I like this talk to the point it changed the way I live life a little bit. Like it could be like simple and easy. That transcends programming for sure, in my opinion. But yeah, going back to RxJS a little bit, like I mentioned Rich Hickey's talk in the context of RxJS, precisely because I think it's a tool similarly to how you view React. I think Kent is. I think it's if you can make that journey from it being very hard to being easy for you, I think it's very good at simplifying things. Like for me, in an Angular application, if there's ever a property that's going to change inside of a class, I make that an observable to signal this is going to change. And then in one simple declaration file, well, not simple, sometimes it gets complex, but as simple as possible, you can have a description of how that property will ever change. And that's a lot better, I think, than, well, like we talked about with accessibility. Otherwise, you're distributing the different places where this property can change throughout at least your component, maybe throughout your entire application, depending on other dependencies that you're injecting in or stuff like that. I feel like this exact tool that I learned for Angular is just like rotated maybe 15 degrees, but still there in the form of React hooks. So,
yeah, I think that you're right. So this is one of the things that I was really frustrated by with Angular 1, and that is anything can change at any time, and you have no way of knowing where that's going to happen. So I spent a lot of time in the digest cycle, like in the debugger, trying to figure out what caused what to change. It was very difficult. And so, one thing that I really liked about moving over to React was explicit re-rendering of everything. So when there's a re-render, I can find exactly what caused that re-render because there's mutation is not an API for re-rendering. And I don't like mutation as an API at all. I want to be like, if I'm going to mutate something, all I want to happen is for that value to change. I don't want some sort of setter or getter to run off and do something else. I don't like getters and setters. I think they're confusing.
Yeah.
Because I just want to be able to change the property and nothing else happens.
Yeah, just can I latch on to that? I'm
Yeah.
sorry, I don't want to like interrupt your train of thought, but you had talked about like you're very into the functional thing. You don't like inheritance. Like I'm 100% in the same boat. Like getters and setters, just like confusing ways of doing functions, right?
Yeah. Yes. Exactly.
The new keyword to me is a 4-letter word. Like, why is that there? I hate that. I wish there was just like you just have factory functions. That's essentially what it is. Here's this again, special rules around a function. Decorators we have in Angular. I haven't seen anything in React at least.
Yeah, you can do it, but yeah, not many people do. MobX makes use of decorators quite a bit.
Oh, okay, cool. But yeah, it's the same thing. It's like those are especially weird rules around functions, it seems like. But I just like breaking it down to like functions, TypeScript interfaces, and like those. That's what you need for 90% of everything. Is just like those two features.
Yeah, they're simple features. Everything else, I think, and there could be some familiarity there for me. Like with RxJS, there's probably some familiarity there for me that is blocking me from being able to embrace it as much. But I don't know. I just feel like objects and functions are just really simple building blocks that you can use to build pretty much everything else. And yeah, especially with like I was saying with React. And being able to see this dot set state, or now with hooks, it's just set whatever you called that thing. It's just very obvious to see what caused what to change. You have your use effect, and that has the dependency array. You can see all the things that can trigger this effect to get called again. So it's just more obvious what can trigger what, and that's one thing I appreciate about React for sure.
Absolutely. Just being able to use like browser debugging is so much nicer. Like in the little bit I've done in React, like in Angular, it's like a whole other thing. Like there's this learning Angular is about learning the change detection cycle and how that engine churns. I feel like, and it's something you unfortunately have very little control of unless you like explicitly take the wheels. And it's like it's unfortunate. Like until you get to that point where you know how to take the wheels over from change detection, it's like. There's this thing going, and to your point, like in React, that whole concept seems gone. I do feel like with a lot of the stuff I'm getting into in this epic React course, I'm taking the advanced hook ones. I do feel like there's a lot of concerns around properly optimizing things. I feel like I don't have as much of those concerns when I do Angular stuff. So I don't know if that's fair or not, but
so you'll notice in my course I have to go really deep so that I can cover the all of the cases that you're going to typically find, and those types of cases amount for maybe 1% or less of the amount of time that you spend. So as far as you are right now, before you get into the advanced stuff, you actually know everything you need to build a typical React application for like 90% of the time. And then there's just that last little bit that sometimes some applications will run into these, especially when you get to the performance one. You'll get to that performance workshop and you'll be like, what the heck? I have to think about this for no, like most applications don't need to think about performance. But there are some components or some situations where you do. And having taken that performance workshop, you'll actually know what to look for ahead of time. So you'll avoid those problems in the first place. But I expose you to some hooks that you'll probably never even use, like use imperative handle. You'll probably never use that. Maybe you will, and that's what it's there in the workshop for. It's not until you actually start building applications that you'll in React that you'll get a good idea of what should be possible or what should be what you really have to focus your time and attention on when building a React app.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I'm on the use callbacks lesson right now. So I think that's the third one here. But yeah, it's like, why would you use this? Like you're essentially memoizing the results of a function call, right?
Yeah. So that one, I've got a blog post. It's actually my most popular blog post on my blog,
Oh, cool.
which is saying a lot. I've got like 170 blog posts. And
Dang.
so it is use memo and use callback. It's all about when those are appropriate.
Yeah.
And they're very related. So use callback is kind of like a shortened version of use memo.
Yeah.
It's specifically for functions. And the purpose of them is a couple fold, but just all you need to really understand about those is a lot of React has to do with identity. And so like use effect, you're going to pass a dependency array. And when the identity of any of those things changes, it's going to trigger a re-render.
Right.
If you're optimizing certain components, and so you're going to use React.memo to avoid re-rendering that component unless its props change. In that scenario, it's also checking the identity of all the props. And so if you're passing a callback and you don't memoize it to maintain its identity, then you're going to trigger a re-render and mess up your memoization. Keep in mind, I've actually never needed to use React.memo in a real application before. I've only built it for demos.
Gotcha.
So it's not a very common thing that you do. There are definitely situations, but I've never needed it in with all the applications I built. Yeah, so like it's to preserve its identity, and then for use memo, it's to avoid unnecessary calculations. So
Yeah.
like because you're doing a lot of derived state inside of the function body, if there's something computationally expensive in there, then you can just put it in use memo, and then it's not gonna you're not gonna have a problem with that. So it's identity and avoiding computationally expensive operations. That's pretty much what it's for.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, Kent, do you have a few more minutes, or are we coming to the end of our time here?
I think I got a little bit. We'll see.
Cool.
Bust through the door and.
Well, cool. Yeah, I wanted to bring it up with React. So I'm definitely very green with React. I feel like Angular, I have a good concept on how to like architect an application. And so I work at Narwhal, and our main product is NX. I don't know if you're super familiar with that, but yeah, I love NX for Angular. It feels like such a perfect way. These whole ideas I've had around systemizing things and stuff like that, and modular design. NX is perfect for that, I feel like, in terms of, well, there's a whole ng module system, which feels like a secondary module system on top of like Node module system, but that's a whole thing we could get into later. But like, there's something about having that in the dependency tree that you can see from NX. It's actually a visualization tool where you can see how all your different libraries connect. Very cool for just like having that up and like architecting an application. I love that. I'm curious if that's a good tool for React. It feels like it would be. Like it feels like for our conversation earlier about like the Lego blocks over here and just being more open on the React side of the ecosystem. Feels like giving some more structure to that, giving some more visualization into, well, what are these actual modules discretely? How do they relate to each other? Those all things seems like things where NX could really help with. I'm really looking forward to getting into React to figure out how NX can be more valuable in that world. So I'm curious if you have any thoughts there.
I know that NX supports React, and that's the thing that they market, that you all market. It's like, this isn't just an Angular thing. I consulted with Narwhal a few years ago on how to make NX more appealing to React developers.
Oh, cool.
I said the first thing was make sure that you're never using the word Angular anywhere.
Yeah. We've been working on that a lot. Like the tools, a lot of them are like based on Angular stuff. So there's Angular in there, and we're working on our Tau CLI now, which is like forking off of that kind of a little bit. But yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. So anyway, so I know that it can be used to build those things, and in the React community, I can tell you that there are plenty of people who are using workspaces for libraries as well as applications. I did a little bit with workspaces at PayPal, but I haven't done much with that since. And workspaces hasn't just. I'm sure that I know I have used.
When you say workspace, could you define what you're talking about?
Yeah. So like monorepo.
Okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
So yeah, I have use cases for it, but it's not painful enough for me to learn something new.
Yeah.
So but I can say that there's definitely a place in the React ecosystem for mono repos, because people are absolutely building React applications and
Yeah.
component libraries with mono repos. At PayPal, I built a component library that was a mono repo,
Gotcha.
and NX probably could have been well suited for that.
Yeah, my first company I was at before Narwhal, we were doing custom solutions, and the whole goal was to get to the point where we had these modules just in our workspace. We just pull them down and like plug them into a new app we created, and just like ship it out the door. So like doing a whole app in like a day was the goal.
Piece things together and boom, there's the
Yeah,
app.
yeah, yeah. Just pull them off the shelf. That was the whole thing. There was something really satisfying about that too.
Yeah, yeah.
Just getting to that point. But it was that was really cool. But I think for most of the consulting we see, it's like, yes, these are NX workspaces, but they're not mono repos. Most of these are like specifically for one app. It's just the app is especially large. And I even actually like NX for like these smaller libraries too. Like just being able to think of it from the start. Like the app we run inside of Epic React. I'm thinking if I was developing that, I'd be thinking, okay, I can do a module here, and this will show all the finished courses, because you know how you can flip between the finished and the one you're working through at the time. I love that feature, by the way. Very, very cool in terms of like just like being able to peek at the answer a little bit if you get that stuck. That's very nice. But yeah, like that's I don't know. And then like you can think, okay, there's my layout module, because that's how we're going to define. Here's my instructions on the left hand side. Here's my workspace on the right hand, like that kind of stuff. And then seeing, okay, how can I reuse that now going down? So like, I don't know. I'm geeking out here just thinking about how we could like architect this stuff, but I don't know. It's fun, and there's something satisfying too about having the tooling in place, like the visualization of that. I'm just something about me just goes giddy when I'm like, oh, let's see how that looks in the dependency graph.
Yeah. Well, you got to be careful. I think these sorts of things can be a lot of fun for developers, but you got to remember who pays the bills. And at the end, I mean, maybe for Narwhal, it's the developers who are using these tools. But yeah, for lots of us, I just wrote in that build versus buy component library edition blog post I just wrote. I talk about how there are lots of these internal developer productivity things that we can work on, and that they're not bad, but they don't pay the bills.
Right.
And so you have to temper that enthusiasm with the practicality of, okay, how do I make sure that I'm focusing on my company's core competency, so that I'm not getting too excited by things that are not going to actually, push the needle forward.
Yeah, I hear you there for sure. I do think, well, there's a whole conversation here, but like there's like this lifelong struggle between like business person and engineer, and there's this like there's a special on HBO I think recently with the thing that happened at Chernobyl, which was actually like, it's like a historical piece. But the most interesting piece to me was the relationship between the bureaucrat that was like trying to manage all this and the engineer, who was like the nuclear engineer, who's like actually knew what was going on. At first they like hated each other, and then they realized, okay, wait, we need to work together. This, like, they both realized like, this other person actually has a unique skill set that I need in order to accomplish my stuff.
That's interesting.
Yeah, there's an interesting dynamic there. I think about that stuff a lot, but I think like on the business side, it's very revenue focused, and I think almost to the detriment. I want to see more symbiosis between those two roles almost, because I do think like in terms of moving the needle, NX could be really good for moving that needle in terms of like a lot of the stuff is around build optimizations. That's a lot of the stuff we're focusing on at Narwhal right now in terms of like our NX Cloud things. I'm sorry, I'm not trying to make this into an advertisement. But,
no, it's good. A few weeks ago, I wrote a blog post called "Business and Engineering Alignment."
Yeah.
That dovetails really well with this sort of conversation. You need to have both, and like nothing matters if you don't. Like the company needs to continue to exist, and needs to push the mission forward. Assuming that your company has a good mission and you want it to succeed, then you need to align what you want with what the business needs, and hopefully that's an easy thing to do.
Yeah. Well, going back to like the easy and simple thing, there was I don't know if you recall the graph that he shows of like these things over time. It's like if you choose the simple solution, your velocity starts really high, and then as time goes on, it goes down. I think the business people they tend to see, okay, velocity is kind of a more abstract thing for them. Their hands aren't in it. They maybe can't even see that it's slowing down, but they can see like, well, if we go X and we forgo a lot of other stuff, we start out really fast, and that's good. In contrast, like a simple but hard solution, you start out maybe slower, but you actually like begin to accelerate as the project goes on.
Yeah, because the simplicity stays constant and hard changes to easy over time.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, whereas starting with easy but complex, the complexity increases, and easy, maybe it stays the same, but who cares, because it's getting more complex anyway.
We're still just like assigning things, but it's harder to do that and not have bugs. So, so I don't know. That graph is, I think, a reason for we need more symbiosis between those two roles in order to like understand like. If you architect your thing using tools from NX and you're like properly architecting it, you're going with that approach where you can actually like boost velocity as you go along. In terms of like, the architecture is all there. Filling out this feature is now just like either inserting a new node into our tree, or like enhancing specifically, like surgically, this node needs to change, this module needs to change, this feature needs to change, something like that over there. And so like that's like where the value of NX comes in, and there's like objective stuff to it too. Like one thing we market is like it's going to reduce your build time, because we'll based on the dependency tree we can say, oh, you don't need to build these other things because they haven't changed, right? So there's some objective benefits there, but I don't know, that stuff doesn't excite me, to be honest, as much. Like it's kind of cool, but the interesting part is the tooling for just being able to empower developers to make better stuff. So I don't know. Yeah, I'll stop that point for Narwhal now. Sorry, but yeah, Kent, I just wanted to say thank you so much. Like just seeing doing the research for having you on and seeing your like the impact of your work over my life, just from the different stuff you've started up or handed off, or like stuff you've done in OSS. Very cool, man. I wanted to say thank you, like for everything you've done and everything you're continued to do. I think you're, a lot of the stuff you laid out, like you had your 10 years review. It's the start of 2020. It was really interesting to read. I felt like I knew you a lot better after that. But it was also like, man, this is like a roadmap almost of how to get to where you're at. And it was really cool. And just seeing your past of like the small incremental change year after year leading up to now, the man, Kent Dodds. So cool.
Thank you, Zach. I appreciate that. And your level of research for this podcast shows through very well. You're very well prepared, and not everybody is that well prepared. So I appreciate that. And
it was a pure joy, man. Like reading all your stuff, I was like, I didn't mean to go as deep as I did, to be honest. But the bread trails you've left through the web, that was impressive enough as well. Like I was like, I want to find out about Kent Dodds. I was like, oh wow, this goes really deep. So it was all joy to just like go through all those. And I'm going to join your Discord. I'm going to subscribe to your 3 Minutes with Kent here thing. And I'm looking forward to just continuing to consume the content, man. It's been really, really cool so far. So
cool.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Zach. And I appreciate you having me on your show.
Yeah, man. Thanks so much. All right. Thanks everyone. We'll see you next time.